Perhaps one of the biggest misperceptions about the gay community is that it encompasses many letters, LGBT. B specifically for bisexuality, often misunderstood even within the gay community. Tonight's guest, Martin Rawlings-Fein, is a member of Bay Area Bisexual Network. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Do you think that's true, that there's still a lot of misperception, even prejudice or biphobia within the gay community?
I think that, I think that perhaps there can be misperceptions that bisexual people are also promiscuous or won't want to stay in a committed relationship or something, along those lines for people who are gay or lesbian. To date a bisexual person is sort of opening yourself up to being hurt or being somehow cast aside at some point.
Right.
So
now, have you come across that in your own experience?
Yeah, I have actually. There was a point in my life when I wouldn't actually identify as bi. I identified as queer because my boyfriends or my girlfriends often professed very prejudiced ideals about bisexual people. And I didn't really want to come out because I thought that they would be somehow hurt by me, or somehow feel hurt that they had said that in front of me.
All right, so I mean, as someone who identifies as a gay male, it's never like, well, I have to say, well, I'm a gay male to another gay male. Do you feel like you have to say I'm a bisexual man to everyone you date, whether it's a man or woman?
Every single person. Every single person I have to tell them I'm bisexual.
Before you get into some sort of intimate relationship?
Because in the past I've actually been hurt by people who have been, intimate partners who've really said horrible things about bisexuals. Even going as far as to say bisexuals started the AIDS epidemic. I mean, those are the kind of things that sort of pervade our conversations, and I would have to pull myself back.
Right. Do you remember when you first self-identified as a bisexual, and what was that process like?
It was very difficult. For a long time I was identifying as queer. I was dating both men and women, and sort of skirting this sort of line, trying to figure out where I fit in. And in the end, my own journey was to, actually, when I met my wife, 10 years ago, I said to my wife, when we were just dating, I said, I'm queer, and she said, well, I'm bi, and I said, I've always identified as bi secretly, but never been able to say it. And she introduced me to the Bay Area Bisexual Network, and I fell in love with all these wonderful people who were just really being themselves.
Right. Now, you and your wife have been together for how long now?
Almost 10 years.
Right, and when you first met, did you kind of intuitively know, well, that person's bisexual as well, or
No,
did you both kind of come out to each other?
Not at all. No, we came out to each other. I was actually attending services at Shar Zahav, and
the quote-unquote gay synagogue,
yes,
correct?
The gay synagogue, yes. And here I was at Shar Zahav and being myself and not really looking. And if anything, I think I was looking for a male partner. And there this woman was, we started talking, and it started being really friendly, and we started flirting. And then a couple of services later, we met up again, and we went on a date, and we actually went to services for our date, which is kind of interesting. But, over that weekend, she introduced me to the Bay Area Bisexual Network. She introduced me to people at the brunches. It was a really sweet kind of coming home in a way.
Right. Now, we've all heard the jokes, I'm not bisexual, but if you buy me something, I'll be sexual, or it doubles your chances of a date on Saturday night.
Exactly.
Or I guess in this case, on Passover, I don't know. I mean, all jokes aside, do you find those offensive, or do you kind of like use that sort of humor to bat down prejudice and misperception?
I think humor is humor, and there are a lot of people who would be very upset by that. I tend not to be. I tend to be more of a, let's work together to try to change those misperceptions, and I'd like to help you figure out that that's not actually okay to say around bisexual people. If you're going to be saying things like that, maybe you should think about where it comes from and what kind of response you should build up in your own repertoire, that you can say something else instead of that.
Right. Now, we've all heard of the Kinsey scale,
Yes.
1 to 6. Do you think that's still pertinent anymore? In an age when gender identity seems to be, I don't know if it's any different, but certainly more talked about, more out in the open.
Well, I know a lot of trans people who are bi, and I know that the Kinsey scale is still relevant. I think I consider myself maybe a 5. So I think that if we look at the scale as more of a spectrum rather than male and female, but male identified and female identified, and how you fit into those spaces and how you are attracted to people. Like, I think of bisexuality as being same gender and other genders, rather than male and female.
Right, right. So. Now, talk a little bit about your personal story and your gender identity and how that brought you here.
Well, you know, I started my transition, because I'm a female to male transsexual. I started my transition when I was 19. I'd known since I was 5, and I started planning it at 9. And I actually...
Were your parents part of this planning process?
No, they were not.
Yeah.
No, they were not. It was very interesting. My mother knew. She knew that I dressed in male clothes. I was very butch around my house and in my friendship networks and things like that, but I wasn't a lesbian. And there was this sort of feeling that like something was off. But you know, I think that my gender identity throughout my life has been male. So I started along that transition when I was 19, and continued it until today. I mean, you know, I'm 35 and I'm still male.
Do you find that it is sometimes easier as a bisexual to relate to the quote-unquote heterosexual community than it is to the gay community?
No, I don't think so. I think it's interesting. You know, people tend to put bisexuals in either heterosexual or homosexual boxes. You can't be both. You can't have that kind of bisexual ability. You can't have that bisexual attraction. You know, I think there were studies back in 2005 that tried to prove or disprove that bisexuality even existed. So there are those kind of back and forth machinations that happen every now and again.
Right.
But I also think that as a bisexual, we kind of don't fit into a box, and people don't like that. And neither the gay community nor the straight community, they don't seem to see. In a way, I think someone said it today that in the Philadelphia magazine that that gay and straight people can agree on one thing: that bisexuals make them scary, make them crazy. This idea that you can't put them in a box.
And do you think that's true? I mean, have you run into actual biphobia?
Oh yes, I've run into a lot of biphobia. In the gay community, my partners in the past have been very biphobic in the way that they treated bi people and the idea of bisexuality. And also in the straight community, I've also encountered that. Well, how can you be bi? You look so normal. You know, I mean, it's very interesting, this idea.
Now, you met your wife at Scheherazade, and you're still a member of that congregation?
Yes, we are.
How do you find that as a welcoming community for the bi community?
I think it's a very welcoming community for the bi community. I see the, well, especially the Reform movement has put responsa forth that say that, you know, bisexuals and trans people should be accepted into the communities. And I really love that this community, I mean, people call it the gay shield, but it's really an LGBT, SQII. It's really like an alphabet soup. There's so many different people who live there, who work there, and make this their space, their living space. And I think that's wonderful. I think that a community can be a really amazing place when all these different people kind of help to build it up. And it's been building for 35 years.
Right.
So, you know, there's
now,
that.
the Bay Area Bisexual Network is now celebrating its 25th anniversary.
Yes,
so how did it start and who started it?
Oh gosh, back in 1987, it started. It was Maggie and Lonnie. They started this group, and they hoped to sort of take over the reins of the Bi Center that had closed in '83. I think 84, I believe. So this sort of loose network of educators and people wanting community, they sort of kind of foster that, and it's been going for 25 years. And you know, through the death of two very important people who were behind it, Joe Holt and Jack Random, you know, it survived, and it's been carried on by people like myself and my wife, Shelley, and friends like Elise and Jen and other people in the community who really like bring it together and make it happen.
Outside of issues of, you know, prejudice or ignorance, what is the greatest challenge you face as a bi man?
Oh, I think it's really interesting. I think my greatest challenge as a bi man is walking to like gay spaces and having people look at me like, who are you and why are you in our space? Because didn't I see you walking with your kids and your wife yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of that feeling of not being included is really a difficult one for
Right.
somebody like myself.
Right. Now, you mentioned children, so you do have children?
Yes, I do have children.
And how many kids?
I have 2 children.
Right.
One is 7. She goes to Harvey Milk Civil Rights Academy,
Uh-huh.
and the other is almost 2.
And you're 7 years old is an interesting age.
It is, very.
You know, even in enlightened San Francisco, going to the Harvey Milk Civil Rights Academy. Do you think she understands issues of gender identity, and how do you language it?
I think she does understand gender identity. She's very much a girl. She's
So you
explained
think
it
you're
several
raising
times.
a heterosexual girl?
I don't know if I'm raising a heterosexual girl or not. I think she could be bisexual. She could be lesbian. You know, we really try to make it so that she can be whoever she wants to be at some
Right.
point in her life, and she can be that as fully as she wants to be. I think that we have this duty to our kids to fill their lives with people, uncles and aunts, and all of this, all these different people who have different expressions of their gender and their sexualities and everything, so that they have models, so that when they do grow up, they can be whatever they feel that they are.
Right. What are PTA meetings like at Harvey Milk Civil Rights Academy?
There's no PTA. It's actually a parent-faculty club.
Parent-faculty club.
Yes,
all right.
and
My apologies.
Yes, and a school site council. So they're kind of different things. But I think it's interesting. Going to a Civil Rights Academy and having all these different ideas brought forth. It's definitely a trip going to
Right.
meetings.
In our last few moments, any advice for someone who might be going through what you went through 15, 20 years ago, going, I don't know how to identify, but that resonates with me. What would you say?
Well, I think that you should be who you are. You shouldn't really care about what other people think, and come to a bi brunch. We actually have a trans bi brunch that happens on the 4th Saturday of the month at 12:30, or go to one of our dinners. We have a bi dinner that happens on the 3rd Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock at the Cafe Floor, and we have all these different things. You find them on our website, and
Right.
they're really wonderful events. You get to meet people that you never knew, and just explore it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Next up, our conversation with Andrew Freeman, one of the people that makes special events in San Francisco and the Bay Area, well, pretty darn special. We'll be right back.
Thank you very much.
Stay here.